this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements. Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time, 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Welcome to One Thing Trump Did, available exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has been around since 1970. It was started by an executive order from President Richard Nixon. It is the government agency responsible for setting national standards and enforcing environmental laws. But this year, President Trump has been using his executive authority to reduce the power of the EPA in the name of boosting energy production and the economy. He's clawed back billions of dollars in solar power grants, thrown the American electric vehicle industry into uncertainty, scaled back on civil suits against major polluters, and is trying to curb the authority of the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. That is the topic of our One Thing Trump Did this week. And here is former Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, that is a notably progressive state, on climate legislation. He recently spoke with MSNBC's Ali Velshi and shared his thoughts on what the Trump administration is doing with the EPA.
You know, we can produce enormous energy in solar and wind and advanced batteries, but he's trying to kill those industries. Now, why is he trying to do that? It's pretty clear he wants to take care of his friends, his political friends in the fossil fuel industry who gave him hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's promised to deliver. So he's delivered for his buddies to produce more pollution. You can't overstate the consequences of this move. He really has turned the Environmental Protection Agency into the Environmental Pollution Agency, and he's done it to help his cronies in these industries.
Joining me now to unpack all of this is Robinson Meyer, founding executive editor of Heatmap. Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So I don't even know where to start here because there is so much activity as you look at what has been happening with regards to the EPA since Trump took office. But let's start with one of the most recent events, which was a proposal from the EPA under Republican Lee Zeldin to repeal what's called the endangerment finding. Tell us what that is and why they're trying to repeal it.
Yeah, totally. So the endangerment finding is a scientific finding that the EPA reaches that says basically, I mean, in some ways, exactly what it says on the tin, that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are a dangerous air pollutant, and therefore qualify for regulation under the Clean Air Act, which is the big, long-standing law that the U.S. uses to regulate all kind of dangerous air pollutants. There's a particular history with the endangerment finding. Basically, back during the second Bush administration, under George W. Bush, the EPA really didn't want to regulate CO2, and Massachusetts and a number of other states sued the EPA and said, no, you have to regulate CO2 or let us regulate CO2, but you need to make some kind of decision here. The Supreme Court came back. It was a long court case. The Supreme Court basically said, look, if the EPA believes that CO2 is a dangerous air pollutant, then it can regulate it. And then the George W. Bush administration kind of kicked the can down the road for its remaining 1 year. And then the Obama administration came in. They did scientific research. They looked at, I would say, the very large body of scientific literature out there that finds CO2 to be the major determinant of climate change, and said, look, we believe this is a dangerous air pollutant. It's exactly what is endangerment finding, right? They reached the endangerment finding, and that allowed this EPA to regulate CO2 under the Clean Air Act.
And that was only in 2009, right? This is
that
relatively
was only in 2009.
Recent.
That's right. And so since then, what has happened, just to catch people up, is that the actual court case, this Massachusetts v. EPA court case in 2007, was about tailpipe pollution. It was about cars and trucks, that are internal combustion engines that burn gasoline and diesel and release CO2 out the back of their tailpipes. And the EPA, under Obama, first moved to regulate tailpipe pollution. And in a very big deal, basically the car companies said, well, there's a number of other ways the government can regulate tailpipe pollution. Another way is this kind of, because it regulates gas mileage, it regulates miles per gallon. And they said, okay, we are going to accept the EPA's ability to regulate CO2 from tailpipes, as long as, the CO2 rules from tailpipes and the CO2 rules and the gas mileage rules are kind of roughly the same. And so in 2010, EPA regulated car and truck CO2 pollution. Since then, the EPA has been intermittently trying and not trying under President Obama, President Trump, President Biden, and now President Trump again, to regulate power plant pollution, because the second largest source of greenhouse gases in the U.S. economy is the power sector. This is coal plants, this is natural gas plants, this is some oil burning plants. And basically, it's never quite figured out a way that it can sustain long enough politically across administrations, and that the Supreme Court will let it use to regulate CO2 pollution from power plants. That is largely because the White House has just ping-ponged between parties for the past, 12 years. And so Democrats figure out some kind of regulation. Trump comes in, he gets rid of it. Trump proposes something. Democrats think it's way too weak. They win the next election. They get rid of that. They propose something new. And now Trump has come in and knocked out what Biden proposed.
So if you get rid of the endangerment finding, then that stops this cycle?
Well, the idea here among the Trump administration is that the set of Republicans who control environmental and energy policy making under the Trump administration, not all Republicans, but the particular cohort of Republicans who run these things in the Trump administration, basically believes that climate change is either not real or is real, but not a big policy problem. And they're tired of the government telling them and telling companies what it can and cannot do to deal with this policy problem. And so their solution is, well, let's just say that CO2 isn't actually a dangerous greenhouse gas. It actually isn't a dangerous air pollutant at all. And therefore, the government has no ability or no responsibility to regulate it.
So, as I said when I asked this in the first place, they're trying to do this. They can't just do it. What are the steps necessary to actually repeal the endangerment finding? Why can't they just, with the stroke of a pen, say, we're done with this?
Well, it is easier to get rid of. I mean, this is minutia that I probably shouldn't even be going into, but just so people understand, it's a lot harder to get rid of an environmental rule or regulation than it is actually to get rid of a finding. And so to some degree, the Trump administration has a little bit more leeway to just be like, whoop, no more of this finding, but they're still going to face a fight around it. The Trump administration is kind of making two arguments about why it can get rid of this finding. The first, and the most important one, is that it argues that CO2 is different from other air pollutants. That unlike, say, airborne lead or sulfur dioxide or particulate matter, which are tiny, tiny microscopic pieces of ash and soot in the air that come from coal plants, for instance, CO2 has a global effect and not many local effects. And so they say, yes, if you want to deal with acid rain, or you want to deal with tiny, microscopic particulate matter in the air, you need to regulate local sources of air pollution. But if you want to deal with CO2 and climate change, you need to regulate all, sources of CO2 around the world. And therefore, you can't do that as the EPA. We can't do that as the EPA. The U.S. contributes about 13% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and so therefore we shouldn't even try. I mean, that's basically the argument, and therefore also they say we shouldn't be treating CO2 as a pollutant under the Clean Air Act. I think this argument, is something I think the Supreme Court's already thought a lot about in that 2007 Supreme Court case, where it's basically said, air pollutants are air pollutants, and we use the Clean Air Act to deal with air pollutants. I will say that I think it also kind of, climate change is a different kind of environmental problem because it is this global problem and because it flows from tens or hundreds of thousands of machines spread all across the planet and not just, is a local coal plant, local environmental problem. And so in some degree, the kind of first Trump argument here is like, look, climate change is a really, really hard problem, and therefore we don't think we should regulate it. The second set of arguments they're making relies on this Department of Energy report that recently came out. It is written by 12 folks who work in and around the climate sciences, and they argue basically that climate change is not a major environmental problem and therefore shouldn't be dealt with. And I should add that report is written by kind of this, infamous small group of climate scientists who say the opposite of what most other the vast majority
says.
Yeah.
So if they do get rid of the endangerment finding, then what are the consequences of that? And I should say, you write in Heatmap that California, states like California, could actually write their own standards if they get rid of this, because they can say, well, now we have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So if they get rid of the endangerment finding, first of all, it will throw U.S. climate law into total chaos. And so it's hard to make exact predictions. But what it would mean is, first of all, the EPA could not regulate carbon dioxide, period, and would not regulate it. Republicans are simultaneously trying to get rid of the gas mileage rules. And so basically fuel mileage, fuel efficiency in cars and trucks, all those rules would likely be out the window. And any kind of attempt to regulate power plant pollution as well would be out the window as well. There may be a second order kind of consequence of this, that states could go in and regulate CO2, because generally the law says that if the federal government can regulate air pollution, then states are not going to regulate it, on the premise that there should just be one set of national rules. It would be very confusing if the federal government had some rules and each state had its own rules. But if the federal government says we're out of the game of regulating CO2, then states could step in potentially and say, okay, well, we're going to pass our own strict standards here. The other thing that could happen is that because the federal government regulates climate pollution, you haven't been able to sue oil companies. States or towns or municipalities haven't been able to sue oil companies for using fossil fuels to create a nuisance, basically, via the air pollution and via the warming in the air. So, under kind of ancient common law, it seems like you should, as a town, if climate change causes the seas to rise and you lose area in your town to rising seas, you could be able to sue just under ancient common law, like the companies that contributed to climate change, because they caused this nuisance for you of you losing, acreage of your town to sea level rise. You're not allowed to do that if the EPA is regulating CO2, but if the EPA says we're out of the game, then maybe you could. But it's going to rely on what the Supreme Court says as well.
Right. And it's, of course, a different Supreme Court now than it was, 12, 15, 20 years ago. Who are they doing this for? Because it seems like the automakers are not really begging for weaker standards. They want certainty.
No. And in fact, the automakers are very worried. I mean, what's happening in the international auto industry is that car makers around the world are switching to EVs. And what's particularly happening is that this new set of Chinese automakers are making some of the best and cheapest cars in the world, and their EVs. I mean, Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, says he's very, very worried about BYD, which is kind of the big giant of Chinese automaking. And he says they're making things vastly superior. That's a quote, vastly superior to anything coming out of the West. So American automakers want a regulatory impetus to help make EVs. At the same time, their most profitable cars and trucks are big gas-burning SUVs. I mean, that's still what Americans are buying the most of. And so I don't think they're upset about these changes. I think who particularly benefits from these changes, frankly, is the oil and gas industry, oil and natural gas, because the oil industry is looking at the global market. They're seeing, Chinese oil demand is plateauing, if not in decline, because of the rise of the EV industry there. It doesn't seem like oil demand is going to really spike in India. They're starting to run out of places to find new growth in oil markets. And that's causing them to really want to protect the big oil markets they have, like the United States. And so they don't want to see the U.S. move to EVs or even hybrids because that would kind of further cannibalize their captive market. And natural gas is going to benefit if we don't build solar and wind, right? The power grid, because natural gas generates 40% of U.S. electricity.
Right. And we remember that in the campaign, Trump went and famously promised to the oil and gas people, if you give me $1 billion for my campaign, I'll help you out. So maybe that's...
Yes, I mean, we know he had a meeting. He said he had a meeting. Right. We have evidence of the meeting where he said, if you pay for my campaign, I will give you regulatory relief. And now it's happening.
Okay, so let me just ask you about one more thing here before we take a quick break, and that is coal, which obviously would be involved here in terms of the standards on emissions from power plants. President Trump issued an executive order in April to revitalize the coal industry. Coal is considered the dirtiest of the fossil fuels. What has actually changed beyond the press release when it comes to power generation from coal under Trump?
Yeah, totally. So it does seem like the Trump administration is moving to keep coal plants that were slated for retirement open. And that will ultimately raise consumers' power bills in the areas where those coal plants are operating. That is the biggest change. I think the next biggest change is that the Trump administration is going to make it easier and cheaper for existing coal plants to run by rolling back rules on coal mining. I will say the coal industry is kind of getting a bailout is too strong, but they're getting help from the market anyway because rising demand from new AI data centers and just across the economy in general, rising electricity demand is causing a lot of coal plants that were once slated for retirement to have to stay open because we just need
more power.
The grid kind of needs as much power as it can get.
Interesting. Well, stay with us because in a moment we're going to talk about what all this means for you, the consumer, and for the environment. One thing Trump did with Heatmap founding executive editor Robinson Meyer. We'll be right back.
You'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have I asked my electrician I found on Angie.com to bury my pet hamster Nibbles in our yard for me? Because I was so moved by how carefully he buried my electrical wires, I knew I could trust him to bury my sweet Nibbles after his untimely end. Nibbles, gone too soon. May he scurry in peace.
Hey, sorry about your pet, but I just wire stuff.
Nibbles would have loved you like a brother.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
How do you make chicken nuggets like 7,000% better? Short answer, you let Taco Bell make them. Long answer, start with all white meat chicken nuggets, bread them in crunchy tortilla chips, and serve them with Hidden Valley Diablo Ranch. Yep, that's Hidden Valley Ranch mixed with Taco Bell Diablo sauce. It's exactly what it sounds like, and somehow even better. Simple math, spicy results. Crispy chicken nuggets from Taco Bell. A brand new classic. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only, while supplies last.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
Welcome back to One Thing Trump Did exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This episode, we're talking about the Trump administration's moves to declaw the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm joined by Robinson Meyer, founding executive editor at Heatmap. Rob, President Biden signed the biggest climate legislation in the history of the world with billions of dollars in investments and tax credits for clean energy. How much of that is still intact?
So the Republican reconciliation bill basically got rid of a lot of the policies in the Inflation Reduction Act, but not all of them. So you can kind of think of the policies in the IRA, the big Biden bill, in like two categories. There were EVs policies and there were power sector policies. And that corresponds to like the two biggest sectors of the U.S. economy for greenhouse gas emissions, which are transportation and power. So in transportation, which is number one, basically the IRA subsidized EV production, and it also helped consumers buy EVs. And the subsidies for EV production basically got U.S. manufacturing cost competitive with Chinese or European manufacturing. And then the subsidies for like buyers, for people who are buying or leasing a new or used electric vehicle, kind of brought EVs to be more cost competitive with existing gas cars. Republicans went in and they got rid of all the demand side subsidies, all the things that help people buy and afford EVs. But they didn't get rid of these production side subsidies. I think folks are now worried that basically we're going to have a very cost competitive manufacturing system for buying EVs, and nobody's going to want to buy the cars. In the power sector side, Republicans got rid of all solar and wind tax credits. So starting in the next few years, these longstanding tax credits to support solar and wind production are going to go away. What I think they didn't get rid of, and what I think is the most interesting here, is that the IRA took a really interesting approach, which is that for the past 30 years, the U.S. government has tried to use tax credits to like help various technologies, and it's called those technologies out by name in the tax code. It's like solar, wind, geothermal, nuclear, tidal. But if the government wanted to support a new technology, like Congress had to act and had to put that technology into the tax code. Mm-hmm. The IRA came in and they said, we're going to support any kind of zero carbon electricity technology. So if you produce any kind of carbon technology and you're selling it onto the grid, we're going to give you a tax credit for it. And that evens the playing field so that all technologies can compete. And it was a really, really big deal for nuclear fission, conventional nuclear power, nuclear fusion, kind of next generation experimental power, and geothermal. What I think is laudable, let me say, what I think the Republicans did that was good here is they didn't get rid of all those other technology neutral subsidies. They really only carved out wind and solar from the tax bill. So wind and solar will no longer get subsidies, these tax credits. I think what's maybe bad there is that solar is the fastest growing part of the grid. It's the fuel that we can add the easiest to the grid, and it's also the cheapest in many places. And so at this moment of rising electricity bills, they've really kind of hobbled the easiest, they've hobbled the economics of the easiest type of power generation to add to the grid, but we're still going to build a lot of solar.
It's interesting. We did a show several months ago on The Middle where we take live calls from around the country about what people want the future of American energy to look like. And it was very interesting to hear people say, I'm in favor of renewables like solar and wind, but I get it. They're not going to provide everything. We want an all of the above approach. I think if you were to actually look at all the calls we got, people said, I want an all of the above approach. It doesn't seem like that's what the Trump administration is doing, though. As you say, if they take out solar and wind, they really are going after solar and wind. It's not an all of the above approach.
No, and what's interesting is that I think this is what we hear from Americans over and over again. They want this all of the above. They want cheap energy, and they are willing to use, they don't care where it comes from. They just want cheap energy, and they do want to invest in solar and wind. But as it makes sense. What is so interesting to me about this political moment and what the Trump administration is doing is that I think they had a real opportunity after the Biden administration to say, look, Biden did all these things, he supported all these industries in different ways. We're going to get you everything. We're going to get you cheap energy and just let you live your lives. And that is not what they're doing. That's clearly interestingly, what moderate Senate Republicans want, because they tried to strike this deal with the Trump administration in the reconciliation bill to like sustain some of the solar and wind tax credits. But it is not what the Republicans in the Trump administration are doing. And since that reconciliation bill passed, we've seen, as you were saying, this like real almost regulatory coup against building any solar and wind kind of anywhere in the country, to the degree that the new Department of Transportation rules could restrict private developers from building private wind turbines on private land.
By the way, if somebody out there is listening and they want to get solar or an electric car, they still have a little time to do it before all these credits go away, right?
That's right. So the EV subsidies, I would say, act very quickly on the EVs, because the EV subsidies go away on September 30th, 2025. So really fast. But that being said, let me tell you, in my Instagram feed, like when I search the web, I'm getting incredible EV buying and leasing deals, because dealers are trying to move as many EVs as they can before those deals go away. It's like $159 to lease a new Honda EV. Solar, you have a slightly more time. You have maybe a year or two, but I would say act as soon as you can, because all that equipment for everyone is facing the same deadlines, and everyone's trying to get their hands on the same equipment to like build out their particular project before that deadline. And so the equipment is going to go really fast to actually meet those tax credit deadlines. So how are environmentalists that you talk to responding to all of this? They must just be pulling their hair out. They are. This is, I think, as the New York Times put it, a generational loss for environmentalists. The idea that we would use the Clean Air Act to regulate greenhouse gas emissions has been a tenet of American environmental policy, at least since the mid-2000s. And I think more broadly than that, what the Trump administration is doing is not only kind of restricting these more environmentally friendly forms of electricity generation, but they're also gutting agencies where a lot of our expertise, and gutting universities and pulling back university funding where a lot of our environmental expertise rests. And so it's not only like for environmentalists that they're watching, okay, well, we're going to build less solar in the next 3 years or next 4 years, and then we're going to see what happens. It's watching an entire edifice of I think, environmental regulation, as they had kind of envisioned that it would happen, but also environmental science, environmental study, environmental conservation get torn away by Trump administration policies. Let me ask you this one last thing, Rob, because there was so much. This is called One Thing Trump Did, and we're like, okay, EPA. One thing Trump did, the EPA. One thing Trump did. It's actually this enormous, Right. What did we miss here? What is the story that you're following in this world of EPA and environment under Trump that we've missed, because there are just so many different aspects of what they're trying to do? What we've missed is that the administrative state, the Trump administration's war on new electricity capacity is hitting at the exact wrong moment. So we can look forward, and we know that going forward, there's going to be a lot more electricity demand due to AI. And data centers. We know there's going to be a lot more electricity demand due to new factories, due to new EVs, because people are going to keep buying EVs regardless of kind of what the subsidies are. Even if they buy them slower than we think, there's just going to be more EVs on the grid. So electricity demand is rising. Power bills are going up. Everyone can see this crisis coming. And the Trump administration has reacted by slowing down construction of a lot of new types of electricity supply, slowing down wind construction, slowing down solar construction, throwing as many regulatory obstacles in front of these forms of generation as they can. And let me cite one example that I think was really, really grating to me, because I think it really represents how the Trump administration is not doing what people thought they were going to do when they came in, which is there's this big power line that was going to get built across the Midwest that was going to take cheap wind and solar electricity from the middle of the Midwest and bring it to really congested, expensive power markets in Illinois and Wisconsin and Indiana. And the federal government had wanted, under the Biden administration, had basically backed a loan guarantee to build that power line. It hadn't subsidized it, but it said, look, we're just going to kind of make it easy for you to get the financing, because we think this kind of electricity mega project is really important. You know, by the way, China's doing dozens of these across the country. And so they said, we want to support our own version of it. That project is all lined up. It started to get built. It was going to bring cheap electricity, cheap new electricity supply to some of the most congested power markets in the country. But some soybean farmers really didn't like it. They thought it abused eminent domain, and they got Josh Hawley, their senator, to oppose it. he went to the President Trump. Trump said, we got to kill this loan then. And Trump called Energy Secretary Chris Wright, and Chris Wright pulled the support for that loan. And it hasn't necessarily doomed this transmission line yet, but I think it's the case where people thought President Trump was coming in to help reindustrialize the country. They thought he was going to, it was time to build. We were going to build all this big infrastructure. We were going to bring on all the electrons we could. And here, the Trump administration has acted in a very punitive way against this project because it annoyed some farmers, which is significant. But as compared to the benefits that would have been felt across the economy from this cheap electricity coming into some of the most expensive areas in the country. I mean, to me, it represents how the Trump administration has not taken a pro-reindustrialization approach, has not taken a kind of pro-all-of-the-above approach, and is acting quite, I think, malevolently against certain kinds of energy generation technologies that we are all going to feel when rates go up.
Well, and when you talk about new power lines, one of the things I think people don't realize is the amount of electricity that is lost just in the transmission from the point of production to when it gets to us. So the newer the line, probably the better it is at conducting that electricity and keeping it all intact or as much of it intact as possible so we don't lose so much of it.
Exactly. And we've gotten, there's been huge engineering advances in the past few years to move large amounts of electricity over long distances. This is something China's figured out. It's something Brazil's figured out. It's something the U.S. has not done as much because we just don't build that many power lines. It's very, very hard to build a new electricity transmission line in the U.S. as compared to, say, how hard it is to build a new gas pipeline or a new oil pipeline. We should, if you think about the history of U.S. economic policy, of what we do in this country, it's that we build big integrated markets, right? We allow everyone in the country across this huge geographic area to trade with everyone else. And that brings costs down for everyone, and it allows businesses to tap this huge integrated big consumer market. We don't have that in electricity. We have 3 different grids that are themselves. We have an East Coast grid, we have a West Coast grid, and we have Texas. And even within the East and West Coast grid, they're very patchwork systems. They only connect, individual regions of those grids only connect to each other in some places. And so we should be trying to stitch together a giant national electricity market where we can trade freely and access the lowest cost electricity anywhere in the country so that everyone can get cheaper energy. And that is exactly the opposite of what the Trump administration has done by killing this, government loan guarantee to this big project.
That's Robinson Meyer, who is the founding executive editor at Heatmap, a climate news publication. Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
And thanks to you for listening to One Thing Trump Did. It was produced by Harrison Patino. Our next middle episode is coming to your podcast feed later this week. We're going to be asking what you think about the administration's tactics when it comes to immigration, which are quite different than what we have seen in the past. If you like this podcast, please rate it wherever you get your podcast, write a review. Our theme music was composed by Noah Haidu. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you soon.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
I'm here on the job site with Dale, who's a framing contractor.
Hey, good morning.
Dale traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for all his business vehicles. We're here where he needs us most.
Yep, they sure are.
We make it easy for him to save on all his insurance needs, all in one place, with coverage that fits his business and bottom line. Oh, I shouldn't have looked down.
It's all right.
We're so far up here.
Look at me. Take a deep breath.
No, I'm good. So good.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
Over the last couple years,
Didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.